Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and in today's video I'm answering all of your questions about Norse paganism in my first ever themed Q&A. I stole this idea from Aster Perpetua, so if you don't know her channel yet, then first of all you have to go check it out because it's one of my personal witchy favorites on YouTube, so definitely go check out her channel. I saw her make themed Q&As and I thought that is pretty smart, because that's just a way of organizing commonly asked questions, or in general having one place where you can answer all questions about one specific topic. So in case someone stumbles upon your channel and has questions about one specific thing, then they can see if you have a Q&A specifically about this topic. So I thought I would steal that idea. Again, thank you so much, Aster, for your blessing to steal your idea. And as I already said, today we are talking about Norse paganism because granted, I haven't made a video on any Norse pagan topics in a while, so I thought it was about time. In these Q&As, I'm answering questions all over the place, so it doesn't matter if it's questions about my personal practice, it could be more theoretical questions, maybe there is something that you don't know about Norse paganism that you would like me to elaborate on, or maybe you need advice because you have some kind of problem in your personal practice and you need someone to give you a tip or something. Then you're also very welcome to ask those kinds of questions for these Q&As. So with that being said, I guess let us hop into the questions. As always, I will start with the patron and YouTube member questions because my lovely YouTube members and patrons have a Q&A priority. So let's hop into it. Alright, first question. This is a question I am actually getting quite a lot. I've been really slack working with Freyr. What can I do to get back in his good books? So I'm not necessarily getting this question a lot about Freyr specifically, but different spirits, different deities in general. This theme of I have kind of been slacking on giving offerings recently. I haven't been connecting a lot. I haven't had the energy or the time, or for whatever reason, you haven't been doing as much as you have been used to. And now you are basically getting this feeling of the deity or the spirit not really being pleased with that, which is understandable if they were used to you giving offerings daily and now you're only giving them weekly, then of course they could be wondering why. Why is that? If I would be in this situation, and I have been a couple of times actually, because my practice has changed a lot. There were times when I was doing stuff daily and now I'm in a different era of my practice and I'm not doing stuff daily. So I have been in that situation and I kind of feel like a lot of people overthink it a lot. And of course this highly depends on the way that you've been practicing. So for example, if you have had a pact with a deity or a spirit, or if you have been swearing an oath or something like that to give offerings, let's say every Sunday or even daily or something like that, and you've been slacking on that, then this will be very different. But in the question, this didn't sound like the person had a pact or had been swearing an oath, so I will not go deeper into that because that would be an entirely different story. But to me this just sounds like, okay, I've been not giving offerings as much as I used to, or the communication has been slacking a little bit. And in this case where you have just been giving offerings less or something like that, I kind of feel like a lot of people overthink it a little bit, at least in my personal experience. All of the deities that I personally have been working with and have been engaged with, as well as all of the spirits that I've been engaged with, they haven't been that hard about it. There were no oaths or pacts involved. That would probably be a different situation. But if I've been, let's say, starting work with Odin or something, and I've been giving offerings daily because I've just established this relationship, and then it's getting more into the day-to-day stuff, so I'm giving less offerings. There has never been the case where this deity has really been pissed at me or something like that. Usually, at least for me, it wasn't that big of a deal. So when I was in this kind of situation and I wanted to get back on their good side, basically, I was just starting to give offerings more often again, or do rituals with them more often again, or whatever I had been doing beforehand. So I would just jump back into the old practice and then hope for the best, and this far it has worked. But I would assume from this question that Freyr apparently was not as pleased or has apparently been bothered by it for some reason or another. In which case, I would still say don't overthink it too much. What I would personally do is give them an offering that is a little bit bigger than what you're usually doing. So if, let's say, you're giving meat or beer or something like that as an offering normally, then maybe prepare an entire meal or something like that and then give that as an offering. Just do something that shows that you really want to establish this connection again, and then give that offering and make sure you tell the deity while you're giving that offering in some way or another. You could speak from the heart, you could write a poem, doesn't matter how you do it, but make sure that while you're giving that offering, maybe as a part of a blót or some kind of offering ritual, just make sure that while you're doing that, you are telling the deity that, first of all, it wasn't your intention to let it slide, and basically tell them that you're sorry about it if they seem bothered by you slacking on the relationship a little bit, and that this offering is a sign that you want to re-establish the connection and you want to get back to the old ways, basically, when you were still on their good side. Just imagine that this deity in question is a literal person, like a friend of yours, and you're used to talking daily, but then life has gotten into the way and you haven't been catching up with them as often as you had used to. And in that situation, you would probably do something like telling them that you're sorry and explaining the situation, and then maybe offering something to them to make up for it, to, I don't know, take them out for dinner or something like that. And honestly, I always think of relationships with deities the same way. So I would do literally the same thing. Tell them I'm sorry, explain the situation, why didn't I really communicate with them a lot, why didn't I give offerings, and then try to make up for it by giving a bigger offering. That is what I would personally do. And Freyr is usually a pretty chill deity, at least that is my own view of him, my experience with him, so I would say that he should probably be fine with that. Okay, that was a big one to start out with, and also my English isn't really Englishing today, so I'm pretty sorry. There will probably be a lot of jump cuts in this video because my English does not want to English. So let's hop on to the next question, by the same person though. I'd like to know how to connect to Huginn and Muninn, as I'm noticing an abundance of crows around me, especially when traveling. With this question, I would jump into one little thing first, because I see this quite a lot and I don't really agree with it. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but I personally see a difference between crows and ravens, and Huginn and Muninn are ravens and not crows. I see those two being conflated a lot, which in my opinion could lead to some problems, because ravens and crows, they might look very similar, but they work differently. Like, the animals just work differently. For example, we have so many crows here in the city, but we have nearly no ravens. So if I would basically see them as the same animal, I would honestly assume all the time that I'm getting signs by ravens because there are so many crows around. But they are crows, not ravens. So I would personally not necessarily conflate those two so much, but I see that happens a lot. And again, if you want to do that and it works for you, then do. So yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, how to connect with Huginn and Muninn. So first of all, I have never tried to do that. I don't have any personal experience. By the way, I'm petting a cat, that's why I'm always here doing this. So I don't have any personal experience about connecting with Huginn and Muninn, but I could see a lot of reasons why someone would want to do that. If I was to connect with them though, I guess I would first of all try to connect with them through Odin, especially if you already have a connection with Odin. And I personally do, so I guess that is where I would personally start. But I would guess, especially because they're out and about all the time, I would guess that you should also be able to connect with them directly, because why should you not be able to do that? It would be interesting to see if they would be interested in that even. I think if I would want to connect directly with Huginn and Muninn, I would first of all just try to just directly call on them and see what happens. That's usually what I do. Before I do anything more complicated, I will just call them in and see what happens and see if it works that way. And if it doesn't, I would maybe just try to connect with ravens more and kind of try to form a connection through the physical animals. So for example, by, I don't know, going to wildlife centers where they have ravens or something like that. So for example, we have a wildlife center around my area where they have, I think they have three ravens, I think, and they're usually pretty chatty and like to just talk to you. One of them once traded a piece of their food with me. We traded a piece of cucumber for a leaf. So I don't know, do something like that. Try to observe the animal and connect with the animal and then see if that makes it easier to directly connect with Huginn and Muninn. If it works, let me know, because that's interesting. Again, I've never tried it. Okay, next up. I am in the midst of planning an outdoor altar space for Freyja. Stacked stones surrounded in amber. That sounds amazing. I have a lovely cold cast statue of her to include, and I'm thinking about some solar fairy lights to accent the area. What are your thoughts on mixing in some modern materials? Okay, I know a lot of people like to stay old school, but I am a fan of mixing old and new things because, in my own opinion, just assume that people did not convert to Christianity. Just assume that it had been kept alive for 1,000 years until this point, so people would still be practicing the old ways and had never given it up, basically. I would assume that people would have developed with the times, so they would very much use electronics. They would probably also have a phone, they would have a TV, so we don't necessarily have to limit ourselves to the ways that people supposedly practiced 1,000 years ago. Because if people had kept that up, if Norse paganism was still a thing and not a reconstructed religion, then people would most probably also include fairy lights or materials that they didn't have before, you know? I mean, churches also evolved. Churches are, for example, not only lit up with candles. Why should it be different for Norse paganism? So that is how I always try to imagine how the practice would look like today. Of course, people would keep up old ways, hopefully, but they would definitely include more modern things too. So that is why I'm personally not bothered at all by using modern material, especially if you mix it with the old things. To be fair, we probably do a lot of things that people didn't do 1,000 years ago, so why not use fairy lights? And if in doubt, it's an altar for Freyja. So if in doubt, ask Freyja if she would like that. What are your thoughts about Norse gods and goddesses as well as others being part of one's practice? Can this be a combined practice or should it be kept separate? And any other thoughts that you have in this area? I personally am what you would call an omnist. So I personally believe that all gods and goddesses exist, not only the Norse pantheon. There will be people who believe in different things. So depending on who you ask, you will probably get a different answer. As an omnist myself, I personally think it's totally fine to mix practices as long as you check with the concerned deities and spirits that it's okay for them. So if you would like to, for example, create an altar, a shared altar with different deities from different pantheons, just make sure that those deities in specific are okay with sharing that altar. Apart from that, I don't necessarily think that it's a big problem to mix practices because syncretization has been a thing for a long time. It's not like syncretization is a new concept. I know though that there are a lot of people that are a little bit more puritanical about it, who first of all only believe in the Norse gods. So of course those people would be like, why would you mix? There's only those gods. So why would you bring anyone else in who doesn't exist, you know? But there are also people who also do believe that others exist but are a little bit more puritanical in their approach, and they would probably tell you that it's wrong, but I'm pretty open, so as long as the deities and spirits in question are okay with it, why would you not do it? Do you have a good starter book you recommend? Honestly, I only know one good starter book, and that's The Way of Fire and Ice by Ryan Smith, because it is specifically about inclusive Norse paganism, or how he likes to call it, radical Norse paganism. You will be very sure to stay away from any bigotry there or any racism, any homophobia. There's none of it in that book. So finally an author who is not problematic. But apart from that, honestly, I don't really know any good beginners books by non-problematic authors. If you know of any, let me know, because I would like that. What's the best way to connect with other Norse pagans? I'm not a part of a group, so please tell me about it. I don't know, because to be fair, I'm a socially anxious introvert, so I'm not the best person to ask how to connect with other people. And then two, I'm always very afraid of running into racists or, again, homophobes or any kind of bigots, especially here in Germany. So I couldn't tell you, especially because depending on where you live, it will be very, very different. I know that in the US there are like a million different groups out there, which in Germany isn't really a thing. so I just keep my practice to myself. But I have actually been planning on maybe doing like some kind of meetup situation that specifically says it's about inclusive Norse paganism, and maybe I will be able to meet people through that. But honestly, those kinds of meetups scare me very much, especially if I'm the person organizing it. So I would say, honestly, look if you can find any groups around you that specifically say that they are inclusive. If they don't have anything on their website or wherever you can find them, their Facebook page or whatever, if they don't say anything on there about being against racism, for example, or being against homophobia or anything like that, if they don't say anything like that, maybe stay away from them. But maybe you can find a group somewhere around you through Meetup, Facebook. Maybe you can find them online. In this day and age, I would honestly try looking for them online. Or maybe you have some more occult stories around you. Maybe they will know groups, because those groups usually overlap quite a lot. But apart from that, can't really tell you. What holy days or festivals do you celebrate? Okay, so I have just recently made up my mind about my own personal calendar of holidays, basically. I kind of try to merge pre-Christian Scandinavian holidays with more modern holidays, but then also merge German holidays with Scandinavian holidays, and then also bring in a more bioregional aspect. So kind of bring these holidays that we know, for example, from Iceland, somewhere into my calendar, which makes sense where I live. So it is a little bit complicated, but it is the classics like Yule, midwinter, winter nights, midsummer, things like that. But there's also, for example, Walpurgisnacht in there, which has nothing to do with Norse paganism. I'm planning on making a separate video on that, because I literally just finally made up my mind about which kinds of holidays I want to celebrate and when, and what to do on those holidays and everything like that. And I will definitely make a video on that process, because it was quite a long process, because I didn't just want to pick up holidays from Iceland, for example, which in my region don't really make sense. So it was quite the process of coming up with when to celebrate what. And it wouldn't make sense for me just to tell you about the holidays and when I'm celebrating them, because a lot of them won't really make sense where a lot of people live. I will explain a little bit more about that, because it will be quite the longer video. Your experience with Loki. Okay, I've gotten this question quite a lot. Anything about Loki, basically. I don't really have too much experience with Loki, to be fair. Any experiences that I do have with Loki, though, are that he can be, and I don't mean that in a mean way, but he can be quite persistent and annoying in a funny way. So it wasn't anything harmful or anything like that, but just things like planting his name into my head whenever I wanted to call on a different deity. So for example, I would want to call on Odin, and then he would plant his name into my head, so I would just accidentally say his name instead of Odin's, for example. Things like that, just like very persistent kind of stuff. And in the end, apparently he just wanted a little bit of attention, wanted a candle for himself on my altar, and since then there hasn't really been anything anymore. So apparently that is what he wanted. But apart from that, let's say I don't really have a reason to connect deeper with him. The only thing I kind of relate to with him is his queer aspect, but that's about it. So yeah, I don't really have a lot of personal experience with Loki. At this point on your path, how do you see the gods? As literal beings, energies, ancient spirits, etc.? This is a quite complicated question and a quite loaded question. I know a lot of people see the gods as personifications of aspects of nature or aspects of society and things like that. To me personally, they actually feel like actual beings. For example, if you would think of some kind of spirit that is roaming around here, whatever kind of spirit, a house spirit or whatever, I don't see those as personifications, so I don't really see a reason to see deities as personifications. So I personally see deities in a very similar way, just as being a little bit more powerful, or spirits that have a little bit more of a range of things that they can do and affect. Especially because in Norse paganism, if you read a little bit about different kinds of spirits and the deities, or for example giants who became a part of the Aesir, who basically became deities, it's not like you have a very clear-cut definition of what a deity is in Norse paganism, as well as you don't really have a very clear-cut definition of what a specific spirit is. So for example, things like Fylgja and Eddas, for example, or Valkyries, things like that, they are very much blending in with each other. I don't know if it's just because people were using the names interchangeably for these different kinds of beings. Ancestral spirits, for example, could become land spirits. They could become tied to the land. They could become elves. Elves could become house spirits. So it just kind of seems like these different kinds of names for them are more job titles than actually differences in the kind of spirit that it is. And I see it pretty similarly with deities. To me, they are just spirits, but they're more higher up spirits. They have more power or a broader range of things that they can affect. Where, for example, a land spirit could only affect things in the vicinity of their power, basically, because they're a land spirit, they're tied to the land. A fertility deity or something like that could affect the fertility not only in the specific area, but in a much bigger area. How do you generally do a blót? Do you have a specific ritual, songs, spells, prayers, etc.? The way I do blóts is pretty similar to how the Yule blót is described in the sagas. And it is basically always the same concept, because a blót, if you think about what a blót is only a part of a ritual. It's not a ritual per se. Usually a blót is a part of a ritual where an offering is given, some kind of sacrifice is given. It would have been, of course, an animal sacrifice back then. Today, nowadays, I don't do animal sacrifice, so I would give a beverage or some food or something different. So yeah, to me, a blót is just a part of a bigger ritual that you perform to honor a specific deity or a specific spirit or a group of deities or spirits. And it's just the part where you give an offering or you give a sacrifice or something like that. But there could be other parts of the ritual where you swear an oath, for example, or you give them poetry or something like that. So this ritual in general is a bigger thing. And then you have the blót as a part of the ritual where you give the offering. And I kind of feel like I should maybe make a video on how to set up Norse pagan rituals, because it's a pretty big topic that you could talk about probably for 30 minutes. Again, basically the same question. Do Norse pagans usually believe in a metaphysical reality of the gods, or see them as allegories? Norse paganism is not a monolith. There are so many different practitioners, and everyone will see the gods very, very different ways. So again, some of them will see them as literal beings, like I do. Some people will see them as allegories. Some people will see them as personifications of different aspects of nature or society. So you will find a lot of different kinds of practices and different views on different things. We don't really have a Norse pagan Bible that tells us how to practice. So you will find a lot of different opinions on that. What got you into or inspired the beginning of your practice? What experiences or research? For me, the first contact that I ever had with anything Nordic in my practice was the runes. I became a witch before I became a Norse pagan, and I just stumbled upon the runes at some point. And I thought, oh, that is interesting. From there, I fell into this huge Viking Age rabbit hole and became very interested in that, read a lot of history and archaeology books about it and everything like that. And also stumbled upon the Norse gods. And at first, I wasn't really into that, because at that point, actually, I didn't even believe in deities at all. But I was proven wrong at some point. I guess the first starting out point were runes. That is how I got in contact with the entire Nordic sphere of practices. Is there anything about Norse paganism beyond your ancestral ties that makes it feel like home? It's hard if I have to exclude my ancestral ties, because that is, for me, that's a big part of it. I guess the only thing apart from my ancestral ties that I could talk about would maybe be the importance of your local area. Like literally the area that you live in and the spirits that surround you are also very important to Norse paganism, not only the gods. The land spirits and all of the other spirits that live around you are very important. That also, of course, makes it feel like home, because it's not like you have this group of gods that you have to worship and it's the same wherever you live, because the spirits that are actually living around you where you live are so important, and it's important to honor them in your practice. That makes it very personalized for every single person. That's why every single person's practice will look very different, because everybody lives somewhere else. And of course, if literally where you live is important in the practice, then of course it makes it feel like home. I guess that's all I can say about it. If I have to exclude my ancestral ties, I will just talk about the fact that the local spirits around me and the land spirits around me are important in that practice. That makes it just very, very easy to bring it into my daily life. And of course, that makes it feel like home. Hey, I'm struggling to get into Norse paganism and I need some advice. Okay, so some advice about starting out. I would say start small and start with like the underlying basics. To me, the most important underlying thing is animism. So especially if you come from some kind of other religion that is not animistic, or you even came from atheism, who knows, then I would definitely say start with animism. Start kind of understanding what it is about and kind of try to practice it in your day-to-day life. In my own opinion, animism is extremely important in Norse paganism. If you don't start with that and you come from a point where you don't even believe in animism, I kind of think it will be hard to get into Norse paganism because it's animism with a cherry on top, basically. People jump right into deity work or deity worship, but I don't really think that's necessary. You can even be a Norse pagan without even doing anything with the gods and goddesses. At least that's my opinion. So I would say start with animism and then try to connect with your local area. That will probably be much easier than jumping right into deity work and worship because the gods are more removed from where you're living. But if you start with animism and just connecting with local spirits and land spirits around you and just trying to kind of get a grasp of what kinds of spirits are living around you and connecting with those than the gods and goddesses, I think that will be much easier because you're already living in the place that you're living in, of course. So you already have this connection to the place that you're living in. So I kind of feel like starting there will probably be easier than jumping right into deity worship. Thoughts on how God of War interprets Norse mythology? I have no clue because I've never played that. How can one start with deity worship? I have wanted, but haven't really found a way in. Okay, I mean, again, of course, I would always say start with local spirits and land spirits around you and then kind of level up to deity work and deity worship. I feel like this would be much easier. In my own experience, it was just, all right, I'm kind of feeling drawn to this specific deity, so I will give them an offering and see what happens, or I will perform a bigger rite and call them in, give them an offering, and then try to communicate with them and then see what happens. Maybe if you've been always trying the same kind of offering, for example, maybe try to shift that. Maybe instead of giving food or drink as an offering, maybe try to give your art as an offering, write some poetry. So basically try to switch the offerings up a little bit and see if that gives you a better feeling. The way in which you practice the offerings that you give and the way in which you perform the rituals to give those offerings, those will have to feel right for you. So just taking a rite from a book or something and then just doing it exactly how the book says you have to do it, if that doesn't feel right, then you will not get a foot in the door. So maybe if you are doing that, of course, I don't know what you have tried already, so this is kind of tricky to answer, but if you have tried it like that, then maybe try to completely raw dog a ritual, basically. Just don't think about it prior at all. Don't think about what you want to say. Don't think about the actions that you want to do. Just jump into it and see what happens. I usually just speak from the heart, and in my experience that works pretty well. I think if I would pre-write every single thing that I want to say, it would probably be a little bit of a struggle train. Maybe some of that helps. But remember, you don't even have to do deity worship if you feel like it doesn't really work for you. For people converting from monotheistic religions like Christianity, what misconceptions might we bring into heathenry that could lead to misunderstandings, and how might we avoid those? Okay, first of all, I have never really been a Christian, like a full-on Christian. I've not been raised like that. So I cannot really talk from experience here. What I see a lot of the times though is that apparently some people kind of treat Odin like the Christian god. They kind of see Odin as this overarching figure, the All-Father that is like the most important being in Norse paganism, which is definitely not the case. So I see that sometimes. What I also see is people are very hesitant sometimes to directly communicate with the gods and goddesses, because of course usually if you're a Christian you have a priest that you go to, or a pastor or someone like that. But in Norse paganism, you do that directly. Of course, some people do have groups, and then they have maybe a godi that like leads rituals and things like that. But still, you usually do have your own connection with the gods and the goddesses. Kind of the fun part about it, right? Apart from that, the overly huge focus on gods and goddesses in general. The gods and goddesses, yes, they are cool and all, but the land spirits and local spirits are very much underrepresented in a lot of practices and underrated basically by a lot of people. And I kind of feel like that could come from Christianity, because if you are a Christian, you usually have like God, and God is everything, and that's about it. I mean, the only contact that I really had with Christianity was Protestantism. So you basically have God, and that's about it. And apart from that, there's nothing there. And I sometimes wonder whether that's something that people took over from Christianity and brought into their practice. I don't know. What's your favorite part of your practice? I think I would say how it merges very well with my witchcraft practice, and the way that it merges with the place that I'm living in, how it merges with, of course, my ancestry. It works very well together. And also I kind of feel like Norse paganism really works well with folk magic. Yeah, it just ties together very well. And it doesn't really feel like I have to go out of my way too much to do something. It's just very blended in with my day-to-day life, and I really like that. Tips for contacting deities, especially when making sure they are the deity you wanted to contact. Okay, contacting deities, I just call them in. A lot of people like to have some kind of physical representation of this deity, so a statue or something like that, and then maybe a candle, because you could kind of see it as a lantern or something that draws them in, a light source where they're like, oh, there's a light back there that was lit for me, so maybe I should go there. So maybe have like a candle or a physical representation or something like that, and then just call them in. I personally like to make a little bit more flattering, so I will kind of include some of their kennings or some of their stories into it. So I would not just basically be like, okay, Thor, I want to talk to you, but I would make a little bit more grand and tie some of their stories into it a little bit and use multiple of their kennings and their titles to call on them. And then I will usually give them some kind of small offering in exchange for the communication, and then I will do it however I want to do it. That will depend on however you like to communicate with any kind of entity. But making sure that they're the deity you want to contact, I will just ask a million questions. I will do my research about the deity beforehand and make sure I know as much about them as I can, and then I will ask them a lot of questions and then see if they will answer those questions correctly. Something you could do though, if it's about, for example, a deity like Eir. We don't really know a lot about Eir, so there's not really a lot we could ask her about, in which case I would probably call in another deity as well that you already have a connection with. So let's say you're already working with Odin and you want to start working with Eir, and you don't really have a lot of information about the new deities, so you can't really vet them, in which case I would ask Odin to verify that that's Eir, because the other gods will be able to verify whether this entity you're talking to is actually the entity that you wanted to talk to. What do you consider to be the Bible of Norse paganism? It doesn't exist. That's the fact. It doesn't exist. We have to make up our own ways. There is no rule book to Norse paganism, and that's the fun part about it. Did you ever dabble in other forms of paganism before settling on heathenry? For example, did you try out Wicca, Hellenism, or Celtic paganism at any point? If so, what drew you to Norse paganism over the other spiritualities? Okay, so I already said that I was a witch before I became a Norse pagan, and what I learned about back then was Wicca, because every fucking source was Wicca and not witchcraft. But looking back, I was never a Wiccan really, because I didn't believe in all of the religious aspects of it. So I basically just took the witchcraft parts from those Wicca books, and that was about it. So I wouldn't say I dabbled in any other forms of paganism, because I was just a witch, and then pretty quickly I figured out what Norse paganism is, and then got into that at some point and stayed with it. So I've never been any other form of pagan before. how do you view the Sagas and Eddas in your practice? Are they focal points of reference for you when learning about the gods and folklore? Or do you view them more as parables and lessons for us to learn from? More figurative in nature than literal, maybe. I would really differentiate here between the Sagas and the Eddas because they are different. The Sagas are history books, basically. Of course, you can argue how accurate they are, but they are supposed to be history books, whereas the Eddas are mythology. So there's already a differentiation to be made, in my opinion. I definitely do not take the Eddas literally. I think it is very important not to take them literally. I don't think that the clouds in the sky are Ymir's brains. And I don't think that all humans were literally made of driftwood. I guess you could argue that I'm taking some parts literally because I really do believe that the gods are actual beings that exist somewhere and not just allegories or personifications or anything like that. But in the great scheme of things, I do not take them literally. Most of them I see more as stories that can be viewed as inspiration for some things or stories that we can learn from. The sagas, again, I see them a little bit differently because they are meant to be more history than just mythology. So I take those more literal. But again, we always have this problem that all of those stories have been written, or most of those stories have been written by Christians. So we always have this problem that we can never take them 100% literally because a lot of these things may be misrepresented because of a Christian bias and things like that. Also, all of these stories were written by men. So representations of women, debatable. So you can never take it 100% literally. But the sagas are definitely a big focal point on my research when it comes to finding out how people practiced, because where do we get information about how a blót was performed? We get it from the sagas. How do we get information about how Seidr was performed or how runic magic was performed? We get it, most of it, from the sagas. So you always have to kind of dig through all of that information and then kind of figure out intuitively what makes sense and what doesn't. Again, you can't take everything 100% literally, but I definitely take the sagas more literally than I would take the Eddas. What are some good sources for information about the Vanir deities and spirits specifically? I understand they are a little mysterious, plus any information you feel like sharing about your own experiences you might have with them. There might be modern books specifically about the Vanir. I have never read any of them, so I can't give you any recommendations on that. But there aren't any special Eddas only about the Vanir, for example. So primary sources basically will be the same for the Vanir as for the Aesir, but there just aren't that many stories about them. So the only stories we really have about the Vanir are those stories about those Vanir who are living with the Aesir, because we just don't have any stories about the other Vanir. And when it comes to my own experiences, most people will probably know that the Vanir kind of have more of a tie to nature and nature spirits and everything like that, whereas the Aesir are more about society and war and stuff like that. So of course, a lot of people that are or feel very drawn to nature will probably feel very drawn to the Vanir too. So yeah, you could definitely say that they are tied more to nature than to society or societal aspects. And of course you have, for example, Freyr's tie to the elves, which could be interesting. But yeah, all of them are usually kind of related to nature and humanity's interaction with nature, let's say. For example, let's look at Njörður. Of course he has ties to the sea, but it's more in an aspect of fishing and the fertility of the sea and how people interact with the sea, and less about the sea itself. You know, Njörður is connected to the sea, but he's not the sea itself. I see them maybe as a little bit more peaceful than the Aesir. I don't want to say that Freyja is entirely peaceful or that Freyr is entirely peaceful, but to me it kind of feels like they have more of a lighter feeling than a heavy feeling. I kind of feel like the Aesir, or some of the Aesir, definitely have more of a heavier feeling than the Vanir, but I can't really explain it in great detail. But I also have never connected to Njörður, so I could not tell you anything about him, for example. All right, Let us slowly wrap things up because my microphone is running out of battery. Is Yggdrasil considered an entity in Norse paganism or more of a doorway? Would like to know more. I think, again, this will totally depend on which Norse pagan you ask. For me personally, I don't really see it as an entity, simply because in no stories that I know of, at least, is Yggdrasil portrayed as an entity that is acting in some way. There are a lot of entities that are living on the tree or around the tree or doing something with the tree, but it's never the tree itself doing anything as an acting entity or as an actor in the story. So that is why I personally don't really see Yggdrasil as an entity. But again, if you ask someone else, they might tell you something completely different because, again, we don't have a rule book. All right, last question. As a femme person, I have some hesitance about the way Norse deities treat women in the sagas, especially Odin and Thor. How do you approach Norse deities in our current age, taking into account the changes of culture? As someone who left the Christian church years ago, it brings up familiar feelings, the idea of working with deities who don't see you as a full person. Do deities change over time alongside humanity? I am interested in possibly connecting with Odin and or Freyja, but this is something that has held me back, and I'd love to hear you speak on it. I see you, because there are a lot of horrible stories when it comes to how male deities have interacted with, especially also human women, like Odin raping women, for example, stories like that. I can definitely see how someone would not want to connect with a deity like that. You already kind of pointed at it in your question. I feel like deities change over time, just like humans change over time. And I do work with Odin, and I was assigned female at birth, and most people will view me as a woman. But I have not had any negative experiences with Odin, neither Odin nor Thor, nor any other male presenting deity in Norse paganism. So from my own experience, I can definitely tell you that it seems like they have changed alongside humanity. It does not seem like they view me as anything less than a man, for example. So I haven't had any problems with it personally. I have struggled with a similar question in the past, though, when I have been reading through those stories and I was like, wow, you were actually very horrible to women. But yeah, I definitely see it in a way where deities do progress alongside humans. So yeah, that way I was basically able to get over that and initiate the contact, and then of course I only really had positive experiences with them. So from that point on, I was like, okay, apparently this is working out, apparently this is not a thing anymore. And then of course you also have to kind of remind yourself that those stories were written by humans in an era where women did not really have equal rights to men. Also, a lot of these stories were written by Christians, so you might even wonder if those elements maybe didn't even come from pre-Christian Scandinavians, but from the Christians. You never know. And since humans wrote those stories down, I personally don't see those stories, I don't take those stories literally. They might still make you wonder though, okay, what kind of entity is that if they write stories like that? The culture back then was different, and I haven't had any negative experiences with any of the male deities. So I can at least assure you that they seem to have progressed if these stories were even accurate. But even if you don't feel comfortable with it, maybe just connect with Freyja in the beginning if that makes it easier for you. And I mean, if you want to, you can totally just stick with female deities. There's also nothing wrong with that. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. But with that being said, my camera is running out of batteries, my microphone is running out of batteries. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Feel free to check out my other socials. And if you want to support this channel, then check out my Patreon or my YouTube membership. And I will see you in another video. Bye!